Okay, well, on my watch it's after 4. There's been some of you ask about the papers, so I'll start off talking about it. They're coming up due fairly fast. I checked Turnitin just yesterday, and I learned in this class only 2 of you have even registered. But then again, that's okay, because the fact that 2 of you have registered tells me that at least you can register. When nobody registers, it's probably my fault. I got the password wrong or got the numbers wrong for the class. But anyway, apparently that's all right. But you have to register it, and please do not give me a hard copy. I'll just have to actually, the syllabus is clear. Turn it in on Turnitin.com only. One of the things this does is deter plagiarism, but another thing it does, folks, it saves paper. You've all heard about the paper issue and clutter and cutting down trees, I guess, the green environment. Well, it saves paper, it deters plagiarism. Okay. I'm going to do one thing a little bit different, just to make sure I know your names at least fairly well. I'm going to call roll backwards, or I'm going to call those who are present. Min, Jonathan, Gage, Cynthia, Cynthia Horty. It's Cynthia Dunn. Okay, Cynthia. Jessica, Leonard, Clarence, Evan, Jacqueline, Soo-Young, Lillian, Lauren. Did anybody here I miss? Okay, all right. Those who I didn't call, whose name I didn't call, they'll be kind of absent. Okay, and we'll move on. Oh yes, about what kind of paper you want. Basically 1,000 words. Now, I remember when I was 9 years old, I thought, oh, writing 1,000 words, that's awful. But folk, with today's computers, it's easy. I mean, all right. I used to be young, and I'd hear the old folks say, when I was young, we had it rough. We didn't even have automobiles yet. And my dad, remember when his dad bought his first automobile? Well, hey, when I was young, we did not have computers. We didn't have word processors. And we had to do ours with a manual typewriter. And I'm prone to make mistakes. I can hardly hit 6 keys without one of them being wrong. But the word processor, I mean, it makes it a breeze. 1,000 words is practically nothing. But basically, I have 2 samples on iCollege, plus instructions on the syllabus, instructions on iCollege. Watch the grammar, watch the spelling. And right here, you might notice, I put Lusitania in cursive writing. Again, hopefully all of you know why. If you don't, it's the name of a ship. Ship names are put out in italics. Your book does that. So they're in italics, names of ships, titles of books that you might refer to, except in a bibliography, but they're put in italics. Oh yes, and while I'm thinking about it, hopefully all of you noticed, the test is Wednesday. It will be given about 4:30 Wednesday afternoon. And I have made it up 31 questions. That covers chapters 19, 20, and 21. Did you say something? Huh? It's what? So this Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday. Now, hopefully that didn't catch anyone by surprise, because I did announce it before the break. What's that? What? Nothing. Hopefully that doesn't catch anyone by surprise, because I did announce it before the break. I got to, when I made up the test, well, hey, I've got a lot to cover in this chapter. So, I'd better get started. I left out, well, we ended up last time with Russia becoming communist. And, you know, it's hard to realize that for most of history, that the history of the United States, Russia has been our friend. Russia sided with the Union during the Civil War against the Confederacy. And then Russia sided on our side in World War I and in World War II. But there was a turning point here when Russia became communist in 1917. I'm going to get back to Russia later, but right now I'm going to talk about something I skipped. The entry of the United States into the war. What made the United States decide to fight the war in the first place and to fight on the side of the British and French? Part of the answer has to do with the United States had spoke the same language as the British. We had once been part of Great Britain, and we felt like we had affinities and ties to Britain. Another reason was the Germans kept sinking American shipping. Now, the German submarines were called U-boats. That stands for a German word for undersea boats. Any of you who know German, I believe it's something like undersea boats or something like that anyway. If any of you know how to pronounce it better than I did, you're welcome to say so. But anyway, the German U-boats would sneak up on shipping and sink the shipping that was heading for Great Britain, including a lot of American ships. The most famous sinking in the war was the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a large passenger ship, and when it was time to make the decision whether or not to let it sail, nobody wanted to take responsibility. You know, it's an old saying, you pass the buck. Even though if I'd been around then, I'd have passed the buck up too. President Jimmy Carter and President Truman before him had a little sign on their desk in the Oval Office. That sign said, "The buck stops here." The decision to let the Lusitania sail was made by President Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States. Nobody else wanted to take the responsibility for it, so they all passed it up to their boss until they got to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson couldn't pass the buck to anyone else, so he had to make the decision to sail or not to sail. And he lost a lot of sleep over it for many a night. He let it sail. More than 1,100 lives were lost, and more than 100 of those lives were American.
But didn't the German warn the U.S. that they were going to keep sinking ships?
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, that is very true. And but see, the United States, what I'm getting to is the United States made a pretense that the Lusitania was a passenger ship only and therefore did not carry any weapons. But the Germans got wind somehow that the Lusitania secretly had lots of weapons on board. I mean, a big stash. And in fact, the Lusitania went down so fast that there was not even time to get most of the lifeboats on. They had lifeboats aboard for everybody. Ever since the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, they've had a law that's on the sea that there must be lifeboats for everybody on board a ship. Well, the Lusitania was sunk, but see, the Germans insist to this day, and nobody can prove that, they only fired one torpedo. The one torpedo should have taken 2 or 3 hours to bring the Lusitania down. And instead the Lusitania sunk in a few minutes because it's believed that there was a big explosion occurred on board the ship that brought it down faster than otherwise would have been. But again, you're right, the Germans warned us they were going to start sinking our shipping again. And the Germans apparently knew that the Lusitania had munitions on board. Now, many years later, how much relevance can there be in a lesson? Right now we're looking for a lost aircraft. Well, they finally found the Lusitania deep in the ocean. They sent divers down to it. The divers proved, yes, there were some munitions on board. Then the British government stepped in and said, hands off. It's forbidden to go down there again. Basically what Woodrow Wilson knew, we think, well, he died in 1924. We don't know for sure, but he apparently knew that the ship was really secretly carrying munitions and using passengers as a cover for the munitions on board. And basically, well, more than 1,100 lives were sacrificed to try to secretly get. So basically, the Germans were justified in sinking it because they knew it was a munitions ship with a bunch of passengers used as a cover for the munitions. So I have to side with the Germans on this issue. Again, the United States was not supposed to be involved because at the time the United States was a non-combatant. Anyway, the United States was actually secretly then helping the British. The German espionage was so good that they knew it. So they sunk that ship along with a few others. The United States did not immediately go to war. Now, something your book does not mention is a Zimmerman letter, but I'm going to mention it. Basically, Ambassador Zimmerman was a German ambassador, and he wrote a telegram to the Mexican ambassador from Washington, D.C. I forget from Washington, but he wrote a telegram to the Mexican ambassador, and he said, if you will let us use Mexico as a base of operations in a war with the United States, we'll give you back all that territory that we know the United States took from you. I mean, the Germans had read their Mexican history and knew that the United States had taken the state of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, and a big part of Colorado and Utah. They said, we'll give all this territory back to you if you'll let us use Mexico as a base of operations. They also knew that the United States and Mexican relations were extremely strained. And folk, we don't know why, but the Mexicans simply didn't do it. Maybe they thought the only very rational reason you come up with is they didn't think that they didn't think the Germans had any chance to win, maybe. But it's not that they loved the United States, but they simply didn't do it. Anyway, the telegram was intercepted, and then it was printed up in the Washington Post. Well, they went to Ambassador Zimmerman and said, hey, now, Mr. Ambassador, I mean, you have to deny it. I mean, you didn't really write this, did you? The ambassador said, yes, I wrote it. Strange. But he never denied writing it. This naturally influenced the United States. Hey, you know, Germany's preparing for war with us, maybe we better prepare for war with them. Well, a few more ships were sunk. The Germans stopped their sinking for a while. Then, when they started to win in 1917, 1917 was a really good year for the Germans. That was the year that Russia pulled out of the war. And your book mentions several other things that went in their favor. The French and British had not been able to win any battles on the Western Front. The Eastern Front was now closed with Russia out of the war. So the Germans decided, well, hey, we're going to win this war anyway. Let's start sinking ships again. So they resumed their submarine warfare. The idea was to starve the British into submission. After all, Great Britain is an island, and they depend a lot on trade. So, but in 1917, though, the United States finally declared war. Entered the war about the time the Russians left it, or shortly after the Russians left it, the United States entered. And the entry of the United States was just too much for the Germans to handle. Again, I read several books about World War I when I was in high school and how the United States initially was unprepared. I want to say this. The French and British said, just send the men over here and we'll arm them, because the United States did not have adequate armaments. And we'll put them under our commanders. Our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, said, our troops are going to be under American commanders only. They're going to be armed with American armaments only. We're going to fight as Americans. We're not going to fight under the auspices of a French or British commander. Many years later, Bill Clinton was to somewhat reverse that policy and put American troops under NATO commanders. But in 1917 and 1918, the United States refused to let American troops be put under the commanders of foreigners.